Hello and welcome to Bandwidth Conversations, a podcast that finds out about the stories and journeys of artists, performers and rock stars of life. My guest today has many musical talents. He is an award-winning multi-instrumentalist, songwriter and producer. He has performed, recorded, toured and worked with artists including Steve Harley and Cockney Rebel, Roxy Music, Tina Turner and Mick Jagger. His longest-standing collaboration has been with Mark Knopfler, not only as Dire Straits band member for over a decade, but also with Notting Hillbillies and Mark's solo albums, not to mention the film scores they have written together. Then there is my guest's own solo career. He has also just pulled off what Bob Geldof did with Band Aid and what Harry Belafonte and Lionel Richie did with the song We Are the World. This unbelievable feat is for the Teenage Cancer Trust and will be released on the 15th of March 2024, which is 3 weeks from this recording. Lots to cover. I'm really looking forward to talking today to Guy Fletcher.
Hello, Katie.
So, Guy, what were your musical beginnings?
My musical beginnings were based on my parents, really, because both were musicians and my uncle of the same name. In fact, they had a group in the 60s called the Cameos, and my mum did a lot of sessions singing. My dad was a guitar player. My uncle was a well-established songwriter who went on to become chairman of the PRS, and we do often get mixed up because we have the same name. But so my musical background really was from being around them at a very young age. And my introduction with recording was when I was 4 years old in my parents' garage when I sang on a TV commercial. And I still remember it. To this day, I remember standing in front of the microphone at that very young age. And it obviously left an impression because I still can't get enough of it.
And you were hooked from there on in?
Yeah, I was hooked on the technology when I was sort of 12, 13. From then on, I always had a bedroom full of equipment and tape machines and synthesizers, and I just became fascinated with the recording process. And yes, it's never left me.
So at 4 you were singing. At what age did you start playing instruments?
I was always dabbling around on the family piano, and guitars were lying around. So I couldn't tell you when I started, but I think it really sort of kicked off when I was 13, when my mum bought me a bass. So I sort of learned to play the bass by ear. I think she was quite actively encouraging me. And there was one event where, because she was doing a lot of gigs, she was doing clubs, nightclubs, and there was one club she was playing. I think I was 13 or 14. And she asked if I could stand in for her bass player, who I guess must have been sick. And she snuck me in the back door of this nightclub. And
I guess 13 is probably a bit young to be in it.
It was a bit young to be there. And so I sort of busked along the gig. And what was amazing about the gig was she was supporting Georgie Fame and Alan Price.
Oh, my goodness.
So I remember sitting on the side of the stage and watching them and thinking, oh, my God, that's what I want to do. Watching Georgie's Hammond playing, and Alan was playing a Fender Rhodes, and I just thought that's for me. So that was where the keyboard thing started.
So had you been playing keyboards?
Not really. I mean, I'm not trained at all.
In any instrument?
No instrument at all. It's all by ear, and it's always worked out to my advantage. And I've never sort of tried to overstep myself. Although there was one session I did in the early days as a session player, which was live television. I was playing synth, and I was handed some notes, and I couldn't sight read. I kind of knew how it went, but I had to lean over to the bass player and say, how's that go? And he hummed it to me, and I just busked it from there. It was fine, but I was...
Oh my goodness.
I was a bit nervous. And I thought, well, it's just daft to get yourself into that situation. So I always owned up to not reading. And it was never a problem, to be honest.
At the age of 15, you left school and wrote to every single production company, recording studio.
Every company in London associated with the music business, publishers, record labels and studios. And I got one reply from ACV Music in Bruton Street, Music Publishing. So I became a T-boy runner for them. And within probably 9 months or so, a job came up at a studio called DJM in New Oxford Street, and they wanted me to start immediately. So I said I'm off. And I remember being summoned to the managing director's office, a guy called Peter Phillips, who's no longer with us. And he just went absolutely mad at me. He just said, "You can't leave. You have to give 3 months' notice," or whatever it was, which was probably true. But I said, "I'm going. I have to go. This is what I want to do." And he said, "Oh, you'll never work in this industry again." And next day I was gone. And I did.
And you have carried on.
Yeah, so I spent a year at DJM as a tape op and engineer, and they let me loose in their tape copy department, and I was put in charge of doing tape copies for artists like Elton John, Johnny Guitar Watson.
And you're 16 at this stage.
And I was 16, yeah. And I remember there was a cupboard at the back of the tape store that had all these old tapes in. And one day I sort of rummaged around in there, and there were all these tapes by the Beatles that were their Christmas jam sessions that became part of their anthology. And I didn't think twice about it. I didn't even make tape copies. I just looked at them and thought, "Oh, that's interesting," and put them back.
That's how you edit, is by physically
splicing.
Cutting the tape.
Yeah, and you separate tracks with what's called leader tape, which is just dead tape. It's usually white. And in those days, the different regions around the world, the sequencing of albums would be different. So the artists would decide that in Australasia they wanted this sequence of songs. And so somebody had to actually create a master reel that had that sequence on, and that was my job. And then it would go to the vinyl factory from there. And nobody checked it. So I could have done anything.
It obviously worked, though. You did it well.
There were no bad reports or repercussions. It was great. It was great fun, and it was a fantastic experience.
At that point, were you thinking that you were more interested on the engineering production side of things, or did you have a goal in your mind that actually I want to be out there performing and recreating what happened to me when I was 4?
At that point, I did want to be performing because I had the whole while I was in the studio, I had a band at home that I applied. I answered an ad in Melody Maker. They wanted a keyboard player, singer. So I answered it and joined this band. And we used to do gigs. So it came to a point where it was too much. I had to make a decision. I had to stay in the studio and become an engineer, or spend more time with the band and do gigs. And I remember asking my dad what he thought I should do, and he said, "Well, you just got to do what you want to do, what you really want to do." And I said, "Well, I really want to play live." So that was it. I left the studio. I'd learnt quite a lot.
Yes.
It's almost like I didn't do the full course, but I'd learnt enough about engineering to stand me in pretty good stead later on down the line. Now I'm back. I do a lot of engineering. I'm really grateful that I did get that opportunity back then. So yes, I left DJM and went and spent more time with the band, and we did more and more gigs. We ended up getting spotted by a woman who was a manager, and she wanted a backing band for an artist that she had a record deal with. The artist was called Amy. Her name was Anne-Marie Mackay. She became a film producer. So from there she was married to a keyboard player called Duncan Mackay, who played for 10cc. Well, at the time he was playing for Cockney Rebel. And so what happened was, after we made the record, the deal was the record never did anything, but she became my manager. And her husband at that point left Cockney Rebel to join 10cc. So I stepped in as keyboard player for Cockney Rebel, and that was my first gig with a touring band, that sort of level. And yes, so we did a small UK tour, which was highly entertaining and a lot of fun. And like a lot of bands at that time, this is late 70s, just one laugh after another. Just too much fun, really. We weren't very sensible, but it was a great repertoire Steve had. And the first song that we opened the set with a song called Here Comes the Sun, which is, such a wonderful song.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that moment, just walking on stage and just launching into that. It was quite an amazing thing. I just thought, yeah, this is what I want to do now.
This is pretty special.
Now I'm into this.
Yeah. And were you much younger than them at the time?
Yeah,
or
I was. Yeah,
you were the youngest?
A little bit younger. There was a couple of guys. Lindsay Elliott, Alan Darby. Alan sadly passed away as well quite recently. Rick Driscoll, guitar player. All became good mates. And Steve, of course, who was quite hard work at times because he was very demanding, and but he was great, a great artist.
Well, Come Up and See Me is one of my favourite all-time songs. It just doesn't fail to put you in a good mood when you listen to it.
It used to bring the house down.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
What happened next was Roxy Music. I was doing sessions, and one of the sessions I was doing with the engineer had been working at Phil Manzanera's studio called The Gallery at the time, and he mentioned that Roxy were looking for a keyboard player, and he managed to work it so that I went down to do an audition with Brian Ferry and Phil, and I took my Roland Jupiter 8 synth, which was quite hot off the press at the time, I remember. I think they gave me the first one in the country. Brian put up some tracks and said, just play along to these. And so I went through all the sounds and came up with some parts and things. And by the end of the day, he said, yeah, great, you're in.
And he was looking for the Avalon tour.
That was for the Avalon tour, yeah. But what I didn't know at the time was that the tapes I was playing to was his album, Boys and Girls.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I ended up playing on his album.
Oh, my goodness.
In my audition.
In your
yeah, and I wasn't aware of it.
How did your paths cross with Mark Knopfler? Because there was a bit of an overlap, wasn't there? You met him before you had finished the Avalon.
That's right. It was around that time, in fact, that Anne-Marie, my manager at the time, got to know Ed Bicknell, who was Dire Straits manager. And Ed had mentioned that the band Dire Straits were looking for a keyboard player, and we had to turn it down. Because obviously I had committed to the Roxy tour. But when that tour finished, I got a call from Anne-Marie to say that Mark wanted to meet me because he was doing a film project. The film was Cal. So I turned up on his doorstep in Holland Park with a keyboard under my arm, literally. And he invited me in, and we listened to a lot of music. He played me a lot of his favourite music. There was a lot of J.J. Cale in there, I remember. And I just thought, I love this. And he pointed me to this keyboard that he'd recently acquired that was called a synclavier, which was a very state-of-the-art recording system. And next to it was the manual, which was the size of a manual for an Airbus A360. It was huge. And he said to me, do you know how to work that? And I said, well, yeah, of course. I just quickly flicked through the manual. Of course, I didn't know how to work it at all, but I soon did. It was a completely new way of working. I mean, Mark's always been fascinated by new technology and is always very open to using it, always has been. And so what we tend to do now is mix old and new and find the way to utilise both, the best of both worlds, really. That's what it is. And the synclavier was exactly that. It was something very new that you can hear the sound of it on a lot of those early recordings, particularly the Notting Hillbillies album, the Princess Bride soundtrack. That was all synclavier. It was basically a sampler. Oh, my goodness. It was a sampler and a synthesizer at the same time.
The Princess Bride soundtrack is so beautiful.
Yeah, and it's unique because it was done completely on the synclavier with what, by today's standards, are pretty ropey samples. But because of that, and because it was never re-recorded with a real orchestra, it has a slightly sort of fairy tale.
Yes.
Because it is a fairy tale story.
Yes, it is.
And when you listen to the soundtrack with that in mind, it's almost like there's a time shift. There's something fake. It's a fake sound. They're not real instruments. It's fake. And it just somehow lends itself to this otherworldly movie, which I think was a lot of the charm of it.
And then after writing these, because it was Cal and then Comfort and Joy.
On those soundtracks, we were working at Air Studios in Oxford Street at the time. And it completely fascinated me because of how important music is to a scene in a movie. I never really had considered it before, how just the simplest things can make the most dramatic changes, like two notes can completely turn a scene. And I was just blown away by that. And particularly with Mark's music, which is just beautifully structured and well considered and lovely melodies. So he doesn't tend to need to over-egg it. It's always very well applied. And so that was a real amazing learning curve as well. So not only was I the synclavier operator, I was sort of his interpreter, really, because when Mark gets rolling, it's just a stream of idea after idea. So it was always a struggle keeping up with him. So I always used to find myself multitasking on a backlog of ideas that I literally couldn't realise fast enough.
Wow.
Luckily, he's slowed down a bit now, so we don't quite work like that anymore. But, in those days, it was furious work. And we used to have long, long days. And I used to wonder why I couldn't get up in the morning because I was so tired. It was just an amazing experience to be working with him on film. And then, of course, a few years later, we went to LA to record The Princess Bride, which we did in the same way with the synclavier. And yes, as I just mentioned, that whole soundtrack has that sort of spookiness to it.
Yes, and it is such a lovely film. And
it's funny how often it comes up, actually, these days.
But it kind of has a cult following now.
It really does, yeah.
And it has so many famous actors in it as well, even just doing little cameos. From those soundtracks, is it just a natural progression to then become part of Dire Straits?
Yeah. I don't even think I was asked. I think he said, turn up at rehearsals, and there we were. The next step was the Brothers in Arms album. And we rehearsed in the Gallery, ironically enough, which was the studio where I did the Brian Ferry audition. Just completely ironic how that happened. But the band booked the studio for a few weeks rehearsal before we flew out to Montserrat. So we rehearsed all those songs at the Gallery before we went out to the Caribbean. And then we spent 3 months in the Caribbean making Brothers in Arms. Again, we were using new technology because digital tape had just reared its ugly head, and Sony had developed a machine called a Sony 3324, which is 24 tracks on a half-inch tape, digital, and it was pretty revolutionary, because we'd never heard digital before, and so it's a testament to how well that was recorded. It was recorded by Neil Dorfsman, and it's just, I never realised how good a job he did until I did a recent Dolby Atmos mix of that album and was able to go back to the original multi-tracks and hear how beautifully recorded it is, because it was challenging, because it was new. It was very easy to get things to sound bad because digital was quite hard in those days. And again, it has a unique sound.
Yes, it does.
It was new. So, it was an embrace of the technology on Mark's behalf.
I think I'm right in saying that album entered the UK charts at number 1. It stayed in the charts for something like 228 weeks is what I read. Which is 4.5 years.
I wouldn't know, but you're probably right.
Okay, and it remains one of the world's best-selling albums, having sold more than 30 million copies worldwide. And already Dire Straits had released the albums Dire Straits, Communique, Making Movies, Love Over Gold. So you're then on tour with them, performing 248 shows. Yeah. In 100 different countries. Live Aid is in there. Yeah. Chris White, who was a former guest on the show.
Yeah, I heard your podcast of Chris.
Yeah, so he joined for that tour.
Yeah.
So what was it like joining a band that was already that huge? Because obviously you'd been touring with bands that were well known before, but this seems to be another level altogether.
It was another level, but to be honest with you, I didn't really think about it because we were busy. As soon as we finished the album, we were into rehearsals. The first gig was upon us before we knew it, and then the second, and then the third. I enjoyed every gig, absolutely. Who wouldn't enjoy that? But that was it, didn't have time to do anything else. We certainly didn't have time to be a tourist anywhere we stayed, because we were moving around so quickly because, bands work hard because that's just the way it works. That's just what you need to do to make it financially viable. You've got to keep moving. So, yes, I enjoyed it immensely. Most of our fans were men, so we didn't have the screaming girls sort of situation.
It's exhausting to be in that many countries and doing that many gigs in that short period of time.
Well, I think we'd all had enough after that tour. And then pretty soon after that, the idea of the Notting Hillbillies album came about. I don't know where it came from originally, I can't remember, but it was essentially Mark, Steve Phillips and Brendan Croker, who Mark knew from earlier days. And Steve and Brendan had a collection of songs, plus we did some traditional blues stuff, and we had a little repertoire, and somebody thought it would be a good idea to make an album. Mark naturally obviously included me because I was his sort of recording buddy at the time. And again, we used the synclavier system, and pretty soon we had an album, and we weren't even thinking of releasing it. It was just a sort of a fun project, something else to do that was different. But I think Mark played it to Ed, his manager, and Ed said, well, you've got to put this out. This is great. And so we did. I remember the meeting it wasn't a meeting. We were at the pub one night and we were trying to work out a name for the album. And I think it was dear Brendan, who recently sadly passed away, who came up with the idea of Missing Presumed Having a Good Time. Because that's exactly what it felt like. It was literally, it said it all, that title. And so, yes, we finished the album and did a few photo shoots and did a little tour of club gigs around England in a little minivan. We had 2 minivans, actually, one for the smokers and one for the non-smokers. The non-smokers van was called Greenpeace and the smokers van was called the Iron Lung. So,
and that must have been the perfect antidote to the Dire Straits kind of massive.
And we all loved it. And Ed ended up playing drums. Ed Bicknell's a great drummer. We had Marcus Cliff come along on bass. And we had our little band. It was great fun. We did a couple of stints at Ronnie Scott's in Birmingham and in London with lots of different guest artists. I remember Chris Barber coming along once.
Wow.
And we just had a lot of fun. It was just so different from the big tour.
Well, there's a Nelson Mandela concert is in the middle of all of that, which is Dire Straits. And then you come back to make the final On Every Street album, which you co-produced.
That's right, yeah. That was 14 months, I think.
14 months of touring.
Yeah.
What was it about that tour that really took a toll on the band?
The size of it felt a bit out of hand. And I know Mark reacted to that negatively. He didn't enjoy the number of gigs and the size of them. We never really enjoyed playing to the stadiums. I did. I didn't mind. I loved every gig I've ever done. But I know that Mark, especially having done the Hillbillies experience in the smaller venues and the more musical, the more intimate thing, then I think he pined a little bit for that. And I think that was a big part of it. And plus he wanted to do his own thing and he wanted to experience working with different musicians, to do something different, as all great artists do. And so he set out on his solo thing. Yeah, and obviously we've had great times doing that as well.
Yeah.
And he was able to tone down the size of it, the size of the production, and it was a conscious decision to play smaller venues and make it a more musical, personal event.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it. One would imagine that it would just be a great buzz. I guess you're not creating, are you? You're rehashing the same. It became a bit painting by numbers. It wasn't really those big gigs. You don't really get to enjoy the little moments that you do with smaller, intimate gigs. And it feels like the band doesn't evolve. It feels like you're going out there and you're almost just pressing a button and off you go. And great, fans love that. It's fine. But as an artist, I totally understand why you wouldn't want to do that forever. Yes.
Despite the huge paychecks coming in. I mean, if you can afford not to, then you do what you choose to do.
There were a couple of quotes that I found. One was John Illsley, obviously Dire Straits bass guitarist, and he said personal relationships were in trouble and it put a terrible strain on everybody emotionally and physically. We were changed by it. And Mark himself said it just got too big. If anyone can tell me one good thing about fame, I'd be very interested to hear it.
Yeah. Well, how about money?
Well, yeah, there you are. No, that's the thing.
You might want to cut that out.
But I guess, yes, I hadn't really thought. I actually had never until this moment thought about it, because I would think, well, why would you stop doing that when you have this instant adoration? But if that's not what motivates you.
It stopped being fun. And there were many, many reasons for that. It wasn't just the size of them. It was, like John said, it took a strain on a lot of the relationships. Not all of them. It didn't on mine. I'm one of the very lucky ones. I've been married to Laurie for a long time, since 88. So, yeah, we were newlyweds at the time. But it was strenuous, because I was away for 14 months, essentially. So it was tough on her. So, yes, it did affect all of us.
You all knew it was over. It wasn't a break.
Yeah, we all knew. I don't even think it was spoken about.
But since then, you've continued to work with Mark, and in all sorts of different capacities. Can you talk about a couple of those?
Well, what happened after Dire Straits was Mark spent a lot of time in Nashville. Amongst all the people he met, he became very good friends with, one of which was Chet Atkins. And he did an album with Chet, which again I was involved with, which is a wonderful experience. But at the same time, Mark had met a whole host of session players and other musicians, and that became the core of his new band. So when he started recording the Golden Heart album, I actually wasn't there at the beginning because he just wanted to break away completely. But it wasn't long before I got a call to say, can you come in? So I ended up finishing the album. And then we did a tour in 1996. The band became known as the 96ers.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, not many people do. I think the fans are aware of that. We did a tour, I think it was just Europe, on a bus, and it was, again, smaller venues, mostly clubs and small arenas. And then I think the next album was Sailing to Philadelphia, which we recorded in Nashville. Chuck Ainley came on board as engineer. There were some collaborations. James Taylor collaborated on one song on that album, on the title track. And again, we did another tour in 2001 that was fantastic. We went around the whole world, and we just carried on album tour sort of thing for quite a while because Mark was really enjoying the new band, his new set of friends. And up to this day, where we are involved in making another solo album of his, and the band are coming out again next week to record more songs. So yes, we're in the middle of doing it again, and it's just
fantastic. Just keeps going.
It keeps on going. A couple of albums back, I took over the role of engineer and co-producer, so I'm much more active in the hands-on engineering now. My experience in the early days has sort of come to the fore, and I've brushed off the cobwebs a bit, and now I'm engineering now, which
so it's kind of come full circle.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I love being involved in the technical side again. I just always consider myself the luckiest person on earth to be able to do everything, cover all bases musically.
In terms of other collaborations, you've worked with a number of artists. I particularly admire Tina Turner. What is your abiding memory of her?
Her openness and friendship. She was the most friendly person you could possibly imagine, because I didn't know her very well. I'd worked on a couple of things in the studio with her, and we'd met her backstage at her gigs or our gigs, whenever we crossed paths on tours. And every time she saw me, she would run towards me and give me a hug. And I just thought, that's incredible. First of all, how does she remember me? Because I'm not big in her life, but she was just genuinely very, very happy. It could have been because after one of the sessions we did with her, we went out for a meal, and I remember my wife sat next to her, and they talked all night long about tap shoes. My wife used to tap dance, and Tina used to use tap shoes, and Tina was giving my wife her secrets on shoes that she wore on stage.
They bonded over shoes.
Yeah, so maybe I have my wife to thank for Tina remembering me every time I saw her. But she was, and also the fact that she was the most remarkable singer I've ever worked with. I remember watching her do a lead vocal on a song called Overnight Sensation that we recorded at Air Studios, and she did one take, and everybody in the control room was just absolutely gobsmacked, and she said, I want to do it again. And we went, okay.
How could you possibly improve on that?
She did it again, and it was better. It was just incredible to watch her. So God bless her.
In amongst all of this, you have your solo career as well. And I
wouldn't call it a career. It's something I do when I have time.
Well,
and I love doing it.
You've released 5 albums. The latest one, I think I've got some kind of brain defect, because when I find a song I really love, I then just have to keep playing it again and again and again. And the one that, so the one that I really loved was actually the first one that I listened to, because I listened to your Anomaly album and Shag Pile Bed. And there's just so much to it. It kind of has, for me, it has sort of an Al Stewart meets Alan Parsons kind of.
Well, it's very relevant
vibe
to this conversation, because Shag Pile Bed is about my year in that studio. It's about...
Oh, is it?
It's about sleeping under the console. Because
that's what it was about.
Pretty dirty, but and funky, but it was the best place to sleep, because the console never gets turned off in studios, so it's always warm. And it's quiet and it's dark. So that's where I used to sleep in between sessions. I didn't bother going home. I used to just sleep under the console. So Shag Pile Bed is about that.
Which recording were you referring to in that song?
That's back in the 70s when I was in my second job as an engineer at DJM. Life in a studio, which is pretty lonely, actually, when you look at it, because bands come and go and you're left cleaning up the mess and making it work.
There are so many that I loved. I was listening to, as I say, on the way here. You have a whole lot of different themes. There's a country feel, and then there's sort of a Celtic feel at times. And
there's a lot of Mark influence, of course, in a lot of those things. But the last album, Anomaly, that we were just talking about, is, I would say, more autobiographical. A lot of the songs are about me, because it was what I did during COVID. I had time to sort of explore myself a bit, and I really enjoyed it, really enjoyed the experience. Plus, of course, we all had time on our hands.
Yes.
And I'm one of the lucky few who had a studio, so I could get on and do it.
And it must be very liberating, hard, but liberating. So it's all you. Right,
it's
from
as
the
hard
word
as you
go.
want to make it. I've always found. I've learnt a lot from Mark, and one of those things is it can always be better. And if there's any sort of seed of doubt or little voice in your head, you have to answer it. You can't let it go. And so with any element of the recording process, whether it be a drum part or bass line or vocal, you have to step back and look at it and think, how can that be better? Oh, yeah. And always you can find a way to make it better.
But then you could always go back and tinker endlessly.
Well, that's just experience. You know when to stop. Because in the early days, you don't. That's one of the things you have to battle with. But yeah, you learn that.
Let's talk about this extraordinary project that you have just completed. As I said before, it sounds to me like it's sort of what Bob Geldof did with Band-Aid for the famine in Ethiopia. And this is what you and Mark have done for the Teenage Cancer Trust. Talk us through from the very beginning, who had the first idea, when it happened, and why.
It's been a long project. It's been over 2 years since we became involved. The idea came from the charity, particularly from a guy called Peter Bradley, who's kind of been the driving force behind it all. And the idea was to use Going Home as a piece of music that we could get as many players on as possible. And of course, it started off in quite humble beginnings. There was a group of session players. The charity had put it together, and they had done just a basic recording of the track with an intro. Then they sent it to Mark and I, and obviously asking Mark's blessing to play on it and to endorse it and to go from there. So I recorded Mark on the track playing the main melody part. And it struck me at the time that what they had recorded for the intro wasn't like the original that we had recorded. And of course, we've recorded that track many times, and we played it so many times over the years in our shows.
Well, actually, for those who don't know, they should first of all listen straight away. But it started out as part of the soundtrack of the film Local Hero.
That's right. In 1981, I think it was, Mark recorded the soundtrack for that film. And this became the theme tune. And it sort of gathered a life of its own ever since. It's been used by Newcastle United to play as their walkout music. And it's something that Mark and I often play together, on events. And at the end of every show, we used to play it, just the two of us. So it's sort of ingrained, certainly in my soul. I mean, I certainly know it like the back of my hand. And when it was presented to us, it wasn't quite complete to me. By sheer good fortune, Mark and I had recorded it as a demo for the musical Local Hero.
Gosh, I didn't realise it was a musical.
It had a little run in 2019, and then it had another run in Chichester last year. It's looking for its third run. The producers are very committed to it, and it's another side to the story. So we had recorded demos because Mark had written about 26 new songs just for the musical.
Oh my!
Which meant that and he really wanted to demo them. We did that with Mark's band, and we demoed all the songs, and of course we recorded the theme, including the intro in its entirety. And it just occurred to me that the intro needed to be on this version of it. So I spent the next day editing it together and stealing bits from, the band recording. And that's when the charity said to me that they would like me to produce it if I was willing. And of course I was willing. So from that minute on, it sort of all started to happen. And Albert Lee came in to the studio here and I recorded him. Townsend came in, Eric Clapton came in.
Did you approach them, or did the Teenage Cancer Trust approach them?
Peter, in fact, Peter Bradley, who was acting on behalf of the charity, would contact the players, which made my life a lot easier, not having to deal with that side of it. He would just call me and say, "What do you think of so-and-so?" And I would go, "Yeah, great, absolutely."
Did you have any idea at the beginning that you were going to end up with over 60,
Not at
isn't
all.
it?
And part of what makes it work is that at every stage I would assume it was finished, so I would mix it, and then another player or a couple of players would want to come on board, and I would give them what we call stems, so elements, and I would say, if you want to play here, most of the time I didn't give any guidance to anybody. I would just say, play whatever you want, and the only thing I would ask is play what sounds like you, play a sound or a style that's recognisable as you, because that's what I was after, obviously. And so each time I got a submission, I would rebuild the track, and some cases the track would have to be rebuilt or extended. So there was a lot of editing involved over a very long period of time, and it kind of evolved into the monster that it is now in very small stages. So I wouldn't relish the prospect of putting it together all in one go. It would just be, I'm not sure it would work as well. And it's because it evolved that people found parts and people listened to what was already there. And I tried to give as much information to all the players as I could, and also give them as much space as I could. So I would create holes in the parts of the song to encourage them to play there. And of course, one of the most notable players on there is Jeff Beck, and it happened to be his last recording.
He passed away in beginning of 2023, didn't he?
Yes, it wasn't long before that he played on it, and I can only describe what he played as being chilling. It's pretty remarkable.
I've just watched this documentary. I don't know whether you've seen it. You'll know everyone in it, as in properly know them. The Greatest Night in Pop. It's a great documentary, and the producer in this case was Quincy Jones, and they got everybody into a room for one night to record their song. So that's radically different.
It's completely the opposite. Can't imagine doing this that way. It would be difficult. In the extreme. But
I think what you're suggesting is difficult in the extreme, because people then choose, what happens if people choose the same bits to play?
Well, then it's up to me to decide which one I use or if I move them, because I'm not saying that where they played is where they've ended up. I have had to move because, obviously sections repeat themselves. So if you're playing in the A section and there's literally no room, but there's a space in the B section, I, take artistic license and move you. So it has to work for the song. It has to work for the piece of music. And so many of the players were so complementary musically with what they were playing with. So you've got lots of lovely layers of, for example, Nile Rodgers with Joan Jett and Joe Brown. I mean, combinations that you wouldn't normally even dream of. Ringo and Dwayne Eddy, and we have Ringo and Zach, his son, playing drums. We were originally trying to get Dave Grohl, but it was at the time when Taylor Hawkins passed away, so it wasn't surprising we weren't really getting much of a response. It was not a good time for him, so we called Ringo, and he was more than willing, and I thought it would be great if Zach played on it as well. I don't even know if they've ever played on a track together, but anyway, they have now. So
did they come into the studio?
No, they did it remotely. I would say most of the players did it remotely, which was absolutely fine. It worked well. I made stems that were basically drums, bass, what I called a house band, and which was partly the original session musicians in Nashville, and partly Mark's band, and then I would give them two stems of guitars, what I called guitar selections, which were of the latest submissions from players, and I would group them into two, and I would sometimes say, take that one out, and that'll give you space, and don't worry about playing all over other people. I'll make it work. And that's what I did. I kind of remixed and rebuilt and re-edited each time, treating it as if it was finished pretty much at every opportunity. I had to be quite brutal in areas, and I obviously appreciate that everybody respects that, certainly in light of the fact that it is for a fantastic cause. And I think everybody is united in thinking the same thing. And I don't think I've certainly not heard any negativity from any of the players. Mind you, they haven't heard it yet. So I'm prepared. But I think it all works. I think everybody gets a shout, and I think everybody works together. That's certainly the overall feeling I wanted to convey.
In this documentary, which was obviously a totally different setup, they had Quincy Jones had written, check your egos at the door.
I think that everybody who took part in it trusted Mark and I to do the right thing. Yes, I think it sort of goes without saying. I'm
going to just mention some names. Mark is playing on it, you're playing on it, Jeff, Sting. I grew up listening to Sting, so I think if Sting walked in the room, I'd probably cry because I'd be so completely overwhelmed.
He came into
the studio, did it?
On the same day Sam Fender came in.
Oh, really? So are they playing together, or they just happened to be at the same day and they did their own thing?
There is a section where they are playing together, along with Bruce Springsteen.
Wow.
Who is who obviously Sam looks up to in a big way. And it just turned out that the section Sam's on is the section that Bruce is on. That wasn't by design. It just happened that way.
It's lovely for everyone to get together. It's not like there's a teacher's common room or something like that, or a musician's common room. You don't get the opportunity to knock into other people.
Which is another reason why I'm glad we did it this way and we didn't have them all come in, because even when just one or two of them came in, the day turned into just talking all day long and catching up, particularly with Pete Townsend and David Gilmour. Mark they would just talk for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah.
Because they haven't seen each other for ages. And it's just rather sweet that we all catch up.
Yes.
And so I think if we'd had a room full of guitarists, we wouldn't have got anything done.
In all of this work that you've done, was there a particular top moment that you can describe? Okay.
Yeah. When I heard the first note that Jeff Beck played.
Oh, my.
It was utterly mesmerising. For many reasons, there was one of the stems that I had given to people was of some little phrases on the intro. I don't want to give too much away, but Jeff was the only one who picked up on it and made it his own, and it's literally spine chilling. So that was the high point.
Okay, low points.
Some of the edits were massive. So doing the radio edit was quite tricky because the full length version. There are two lengths. There is a vinyl length, which is 8.5 minutes. And then there is an extended version, which is available digitally and streaming, and that's 9.5 minutes. So to get a 4.5 minute radio edit was really tricky.
Yeah. How are you going to sell this?
Well, the main package is the vinyl. It's a what you'd call a special edition package, really, with a beautiful booklet. We should mention the artwork, which was done by Sir Peter Blake. Yes.
How he's managed to fit everyone in.
Yeah, it's really quite something, isn't it? Very much in the style of Sgt. Pepper, of course. You get a lovely, very tangible, beautiful 12-inch vinyl that is cut at half speed. So the quality's wonderful. Single-sided. There's a etching on the reverse side. It very much feels like a collector's item. So that's the main package, really, I suppose. Then you've got the streaming, you've got CD and Blu-ray, because there's an Atmos version, of course, as well. So there's the CD and Blu-ray. I'm sure there are other special auctionable items that are, in the pipeline, particularly the artwork, I know. And I know there's a whole host of the guitars that have been signed by everybody that are scheduled for auction. So there's potential for raising a lot of money. For a wonderful cause. Yeah. It's obviously something that the band have been involved with for many years. Mark and John, back in the Dire Straits touring days, they were involved with Teenage Cancer Trust. Everybody who played on the record, they all have some kind of connection with the charity. Certainly, that's the way it seems to me. They're either all patrons or they have done something in the past for either Teen Cancer America or Teenage Cancer Trust. I'll play it to you.
Oh, that'd be so great. What goes on tour stays on tour. Can you describe an outrageous moment?
A scary moment.
Okay, a scary moment.
When I was touring with Roxy Music, one of my new friends was the bass player, a guy called Alan Spenner, who passed away not long after that tour, very sadly. He was the funkiest bass player in the UK. an incredible player and an incredible man. And he kind of looked after me, and he had some quite serious drug issues and was struggling. But he was such a wonderful player, and Brian used to support him whenever he could. And Brian loved him very, very dearly and wanted him, despite his problems, Brian wanted him in the band. But he was often a liability. And there was one time when him and Neil Hubbard, the guitarist, were in my hotel room, and Alan thought it would be a good idea to throw a potted plant out the window, but I mean a big potted plant. But we were on the 20th floor of a hotel in New York, and I remember looking out the window as it was careering down towards the road, and it landed in between two parked cars. And I just thought, oh my God. He just had those crazy moments, and he would do crazy things. You know, we weren't one of those bands that trash things, but he took a bit of looking after.
Yeah.
But by the same token, he was just extremely funny, and very, very intelligent. He just had other issues, and it was scary. He took me, and I was very young. I was 21, and he sort of took me.
I'm forgetting how young you were when you were with them.
He took me under his wing because there were a lot of drugs around at the time, and we used to get invited to parties after show, and God knows, all sorts of things would appear. And Alan would always come over to me and say, just come over here, get away from that. And he was trying to protect me.
He was protecting you even though he couldn't protect himself.
From his ultimate demise. And so he did. He successfully protected me because I was 21 and I was just up for anything. I was just so happy, and everything was amazing. I had pink hair.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
I didn't find a photograph of that.
I was, I was just having the time of my life, and he really did look after me. No, I loved him dearly.
Let's talk about a disastrous moment.
With Dire Straits, we did a lot of gigs in Australia, and a lot of kind of weather-affected gigs. And there was one gig where, I think it was in Queensland, where it absolutely came down, pouring with rain, thunderstorm, and all the power went out. All the back line went out, except so Mark had his lead vocal mic, and that was it. And we were in the middle of probably Romeo and Juliet. It always happens during Romeo and Juliet. And the crowd just started singing, carried on singing the whole song until the power came back on. And again, we played on the same tour. We played a gig in Germany, in the Waldbühne in Berlin, and it rained. But we had a sort of a tent thing over the roof, over the stage, and it filled with water. And we were looking up at it, thinking, "Oh my God, that's filling up, and it's not going anywhere." And there was this almighty rip, and about 1,000 gallons of water fell on top of John.
Oh no!
And I remember the slap on his head, the water hitting his head, and it almost knocked him out. I think he was staggering around. It was so funny. It wasn't funny for him, but it was so funny to see him. Absolutely, it was like he was going to. Is he going to go? Is he going to go? He's going. Oh no, he's back. He's back. He held it together, and the entire stage was just this. It was like a river.
Because you're worried that everyone would be electrocuted.
Well, in those days, you could be electrocuted. So, Mark always used to sing back from the mic, as every band became accustomed to doing in those days, because we didn't have the protection that we have now from electric shock. Things were pretty basic back then. You could get shocked quite a lot. But yeah, that was hilarious. Luckily, no one got hurt. And other gigs. We did a gig in Naples once, and there was lightning, and it came down and it hit the barrier on the front of the stage, and about 150 fans got electrocuted. They all got thrown back.
Physically?
They got physically thrown back, and obviously it took the power out. So the crew are running around crazy trying to fix things, and we love Italians, but they were throwing coins at the crew.
Oh my gosh, well, why were they doing that?
Because they just wanted to know why we weren't playing. But you've just been electrocuted. It's crazy. It's crazy out there. And some gigs, are crazier than others.
Has there ever been a low moment where you thought, I've had enough of this now?
No, never. There have been moments when I've been homesick, away far too long. But I've never thought, I don't want to do this. Never. Not even close.
Well, that's fantastic. For young musicians of today, if you could tell them one thing, what would you tell them?
Stick at it. Absolutely stick at it, because it doesn't happen straight away. And it doesn't happen if you don't try. So you have to be persistent, and to the point of being annoying sometimes. You have to be tenacious. And I see it in my son Max, who is also an engineer. He's as tenacious as I was, if not more so. But he has to be, because it's tough out there. Yeah, you have to just stick at it and believe in yourself.
That's great advice. I have 2 daughters who are singer-songwriters, and it's a long road.
It's a long road. But if you've got belief in yourself and a genuine passion, that's the other thing you have to have. Because if you're not passionate about it, forget it. Literally forget it. There's no point. You've got to be passionate. You've got to love it. If you don't love it, then love something else. It's as simple as that.
So you're not ever going to consider retiring?
I don't know what I'd do. Apart from surf.
Well, yeah, that's quite nice.
But I think
you can still do that on holidays.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for talking to me.
It's been a pleasure.
And also thanks to Robin Stewart, our wonderful mutual friend who made the introduction. And I'm just going to finish because William Shakespeare wrote of himself, "A jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one." And so it was a compliment. We've hijacked it and turned it into something that is supposed to not be so good. I would definitely say of all the things that you do, you seem to be a master of all of them. So that's pretty amazing. So
I'm working at it. It's working in progress.
And it's working. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to Bandwidth Conversations. Thanks to Anna B., Head of Marketing, to Matthew Passy and all at the Podcast Consultant, to Bagawire for the music, to the Money Maze Podcast. Thank you for listening. Any feedback, please email me, katie@bandwidthconversations.com. Please sign up on our website, www.bandwidthconversations.com, so we can notify you about new podcast releases. We hope to see you again soon.